think that it'd be good just to start off with, John, if you could kind of set up the framing for this whole move that we're talking about from extractive, or neoliberal economics to whole regenerative economics. Anything you want to share about that and maybe the lineage of that work from holistic land management and agriculture?
Sure, Brian. First, thanks for pulling this together. It's always difficult to try to summarize this, but I think the first thing I would say is that this is really not a new idea. It's really the synthesis of thinking that has been around literally for millennia. We've, in my opinion, sort of detoured off the wisdom we've known in sort of a reductionist pursuit of our progress, so we kind of need to get back on path as opposed to invent something totally new. And so the basic idea of regenerative economics is that there are universal patterns and principles that explain how everything from energy to living systems to human systems, even to consciousness, which Thomas will explain to us, I couldn't explain, but that there are these universal patterns and principles. And that if we're going to have an economy that serves the needs of humanity while respecting the boundaries and the reality of the planet we live on, and as you say, embeds our human economy within the planetary reality, then humans aren't smart enough to figure that out. The current kind of accelerating interconnected crises should tell us that. And rather than try to sort of spot fix the symptoms of the problem, we need to get back to kind of first principles and think about how to realign our human economy with these universal patterns and principles. And so rather than go into what those patterns and principles are, that would take a lot of time to explain, the big idea is that either one accepts that there are patterns and principles, and if you say yes to that question, then you either have to assume or believe that the human economy can only be sustainable if it's aligned with those same patterns and principles, or someone needs to make the case as to why the human economy is the one exception to the rule in the universe that everything follows these same patterns and principles. And as you say, I first discovered this idea through my work in regenerative agriculture. So this is a paradigm that exists in the system we call agriculture, which of course is the system that is the root of any economy and is closest to living systems. And so what I am trying to do, and again, this is building on work of many others, Jane Jacobs being probably first and foremost in that list, is to think about how an economy would work, which is in alignment with these same patterns and principles. And one of the principles that we define is what I call in-right relationship, which comes from my Quaker friend, Peter Brown. Mm-hmm. And at the heart of any healthy system is that the different aspects of the system are in right relationship with each other, which seemed to be a theme that you talked about in your talk yesterday. So maybe you could share that a bit.
Yeah, right. That's right. So I love the word responsibility. Like, what is our ability to respond? And so there's reactivity, if I feel cut off, and if I feel like I'm kind of a particle, like a separate particle within a system. And as you mentioned before, it's a people's problem. I think, yes, that's true. And like every one of us is kind of animated planet. Like we are like a chunk of planet walking around thinking, and bringing in innovation. So even if a crisis might be threatening to humanity, or for humanity, it's also that we are kind of a development of the planet itself. The planet is a system. We are not separate. And that's why I love when you bring in relation, because I think restoring appropriate relation to ourselves, to each other, to the systems that we live in, that we are able to think and feel the systems that we live in. And then there is a natural responsiveness. There's the ability to respond. So less than it being a duty or kind of a law-driven responsibility, it's a care-driven responsibility that comes like when parents care for their children, they do it because they feel their children. But if parents don't feel their children, they need all kinds of rules how to educate and be with their child or their children. But if there's a natural connection, you naturally intuit, you feel, you care, you protect, you do all the right things, so to speak, naturally. And I'm very curious how because the great principles, the universal principles that we find basically reflected in all the great wisdom traditions in their core teaching, not in their interpretations often, but in their core teaching. If you look into, Hinduism and yoga, if you look into Kabbalah and Jewish tradition and many others, you'll find very similar principles. And they grew since thousands of years, they're around. And so what actually they say, and it's very similar and underlining what you said before, that there are universal principles and universal organizing principles of systems. Our body is a system. The fact, why do all my cells stick together throughout this conversation and not decide differently? So what is organizing millions of cells to have a conversation that is joyful, that I'm able to feel joy, that I'm interested in what you two have to say, I'm engaged, but millions of cells work together to produce that. And I find it always interesting to see, wow, actually in my body we have thousands and thousands of years of life, trying out life to come to this conversation. And so what are the principles that are at work here? And I think the more we'll understand those principles and how we often violate those principles, and what does it mean, what does it need, and what does it mean to come back into alignment? And I found out that one of the most important practices is really restoring relation. And that on the basis of restoring relations, many puzzle pieces will fall into place. Yeah, I agree.
No, I'd like to pick up on that, because one of the things I learned is that at a cellular level, we actually are in conversation. Our cells are in conversation. Right. And they need to move information back and forth that's accurate.
Right.
So otherwise you get sick.
Right. And
so if you kind of extend that up to our current culture of, the post-fact world, we're having communication among important people where facts no longer matter. That's as if your cells could communicate with bad information and think you could stay healthy. It's very dangerous. Right. But what I wanted to respond on is your responsibility. I really like that. And maybe for Brian's sake, make a concrete example of how these principles relate to the modern economy, because I know it often gets sort of lost in abstraction. So if right relationship is a principle, and people can say it in whatever way they like, and then you think about our modern global economy, where the dominant institution is the global corporation, most of which are public companies, which means that their ownership is traded. Their shares are traded on stock exchanges, most of them now by computers in nanoseconds. Think about the relationship. One of the principal relationships of any business is the relationship between the company and its customer. Another principal relationship would be the relationship between the company and its employees. But a third relationship is the relationship between a company and its owners. And our pursuit of efficient capital markets, which we believe is progress, and has facilitated a lot of progress. The whole capital formation process has enabled massive enterprises that do many good things in the world to source capital. But the capital markets and the way we now practice ownership, we've disintermediated, or we've severed the relationship between companies and their real owners. So a pension fund, which may own 10% of a company, or more likely 1% of a company, invests in a fund that's managed by a third party who trades stocks all day, rather than taking the responsibility to what needs to change in the economy in this new context. So we have these massive enterprises who have, in a sense, no real owners, and therefore no one with the ability to respond to the changing context.